What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up? What up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
Our interview today with Dave Nadelberg, founder and host of Mortified, the Mortified podcast, Mortified live show, Mortified on Netflix, on TV, pretty much everywhere you look, there's a Mortified. If you're not familiar, it's live. People getting up on stage and reading from their diaries and sharing their most horrifying moments. Pretty cool stuff. We're going to talk to Dave about how he's built this brand. It's now in its 13th year. He gives us some lessons about how he's built success from a series of small successes, each one building on the other. And also he explains why Hollywood ain't shit. Now let's get into the interview with Dave Nadelberg.
So from what I researched about this show,
Oh yeah.
So the
Some
goal
people
of it
want to
is
know
to
what's
kind
the
of
point.
just so I know how to like steer. I mean, obviously it's your job to you steer me however you want, but like
It is.
This is for an audience
gotta
of
start
marketing professionals. Meaning
No.
no.
It should be.
Good to know.
But it's not.
It's just it's just
It's
like
just a
shit
show.
I find interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. The
okay.
idea is,
Good work. Good tagline.
yeah, shit to talk about.
Okay.
No, the idea is to talk to creative people who are building businesses around being creative, around
Okay.
their art,
Okay.
and to sort of find out why and how they do it. It's, a good show is probably 70% entertainment and 30% wisdom.
Right.
But
I've
we're
got
trying to get
neither.
stuff. Yeah, some of the shows are neither.
No, I've got neither. Sorry.
Well, we do. The tagline is actually low expectations.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and
That really should be it.
That's what I say on every date.
That's a great
low
idea.
Expectations.
And I did say that in the intro to the first episode, and I got a bunch of comments on that. Like, people are really enthused about that.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, it's meant to more be just like universal.
Okay.
You mentioned in an interview that I read that you're fascinated by how people are successful at anything, and
You've done research.
yeah.
What did I say? What did I say?
Well, I like to misquote stuff.
Okay.
So
No,
you
you
can't
That's
do
fine.
that.
That's totally fine.
No, you can't really misquote unless you've read, unless you've
Right.
done the research.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm just making
No,
shit
I
up
get
out
it.
of my head.
But so I said something
stupid.
about I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by
You
people.
said, like, I don't really care about celebrities being on the show,
oh right.
but I'm curious about how people are successful.
yes.
And and so I share that, right? And so for me, that's kind of what this is about, is like talking to people that are successful
Yep.
in careers that are driven by art, and sort
Yeah.
of how do you make a business and a life that kind of work together with that.
Yeah.
And
All right.
go.
Wisdom, entertainment.
Nice. All right, we're done. Thanks for being here on Rebel Radio. But because I always forget.
Is this one of those shows that just starts and I didn't know?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
gonna go. We'll go back and cut an intro.
No, that's fine.
Hi, welcome to Rebel Radio. So before I forget, because I always forget, like, give us the socials and the website and stuff. Like, let's promote
Sure.
some shit, and then
Okay.
we'll come back.
Well, should I ID myself? Do we care?
No, I'll do it.
Okay. So the website, you can find out about Mortified at getmortified.com. You can find out about our films and books and podcasts and all that stuff. You can also find us on Twitter at Mortified. You can also find us on Facebook at Mortified Media. And we're not on Instagram because I'm an old curmudgeon. But I am, so you can stalk me there.
Nice. That's a lot of socials. Well, all right, let's do the actual intro. We're going to give James a lot of work to do cutting shit because he's likes a lot of work to do. All right, welcome to Rebel Radio. Our guest today is Dave Nadelberg, founder, producer of Mortified and the Mortified brand, Mortified Sessions, Mortified Nation, the Mortified podcast, newspaper.
Mortified chewing gum.
Right. Awesome. And welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for
you
being
very
here.
much.
I'm excited to meet you. We met over the phone last year.
Yeah.
We share one of my best friends is a guy named Justin. Shout out to Justin. He claims to listen to the show, so we'll find out if he does. And he's your cousin.
He's my cousin.
And I think he's one of the most interesting people. I wish he would go on Mortified, although he probably
He'd be a little timid. I think he'd be a little timid.
But forget about him. Let's talk about why you do this.
I do it for Justin.
Nice.
I do everything in my life for Justin.
Nice. So wait, give us
so-
for anyone who doesn't know what Mortified is, although you should have checked the socials by now. What is it?
Mortified is a storytelling project where adults share their most embarrassing childhood writings, and I'm giggling because like whenever I feel on the spotlight of like I've clearly said this a million times.
Yeah.
But Mortified is a storytelling project where adults share their most embarrassing childhood writings and artwork in front of total strangers. So that's like, whatever embarrassing diary entry you wrote it when you were 14, or some song lyrics maybe you wrote when you were 15, or some amazing poetry you wrote when you were 9, and somehow you agree, for whatever weird reason, to share them with our audience.
Why do people agree to do it?
Well, I find it to be a sort of a weird, it's kind of a cocktail of catharsis and curiosity and a desire to make people laugh. And, I think, and then I think the other big C word in that is community. I think we all
That's not the one I was expecting.
No, there's another C word, but that has nothing to do with our show. Well, it's one of the things people write in their diary entries, but that's a different topic. No, but community, which is, I think we live in a world. I don't know if this hunger existed in the 1950s or in prior times as much as it does now.
Yeah.
But I do believe we do live in a time where we feel isolated, we feel hungry, we feel thirsty for connection, for the sense of togetherness, because, I don't know, maybe back in the day that did exist, but we were sort of a homogenized world where that wasn't as necessary. And so now I think anything that can give us that sense of like, no, I know we're all still like individual weirdos and freaks, but there's this connective tissue, and I think there's something really gratifying for both audience members and participants when they get to experience that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, there's a lot of talk about social media, right, and the impact that it's having on society. I think, from my perspective, there's a lot of conclusions being drawn way too early, but
I would agree.
Nonetheless, there is a sense that, if you sit around with people in their 40s, like I do when I have to,
which is just me when I'm alone, because I am 40.
Me too. but older generation is convinced that it's ruined children's, or all of our ability to connect with other people, that we all just stare at our phones. And there's obviously some truth to that, but there's another side of it as well. But it's kind of what you're talking about, right? That sense of isolation. And then there's the flip side of it, which is that it's opened the floodgates for this kind of oversharing.
Yep.
And from my perspective, Mortified sort of sits in an interesting intersection of those things, right? Where people are oversharing, or they're sharing things that are technically no one's business, and that probably in previous generations we wouldn't have been comfortable. It's hard to imagine this happening in the 50s.
Occasionally we'll get participants in our stage show. So I should also say, like, the Mortified exists as primarily as a stage show across the world, but also as books, and we've done a film called Mortified Nation.
You guys have to do a game.
Yeah, we're gonna do a game in chewing gum and one more product. A game for real?
Yeah.
We actually have
like
been
a card game.
We can get into that in a sec, or we can get into it now. But I've developed games like where we've had conversations with people about that, and I know what those are, and I would love to do them one day.
Gotta do it.
Nice.
Where was I? Sorry. I'm sure whatever I was saying was brilliant and fascinating and
It was
gripping.
awesome.
It was amazing.
I remember that time you said something super
it was
smart.
so cool.
Yeah.
Wait, so I do have a question about community.
Okay.
Sorry. Did you know it was going to be a community? Like when
No.
it just, that's what came out of it.
It was supposed to be this dumb experiment I was doing one night because I was sort of I had some success as a young Hollywood screenwriter, and then that success got taken away because that's just what happens. And then you do the baby steps of building your career. But so maybe taken away is probably a little too dramatic and babyish of a term. But I had a bunch of pilots, and then they died. And then in the ashes of that, what felt like failure at the time, I was like, I want to do something where I'm my own green light. And I had this idea kicking around called Crush Nights, I think, where it was like people reading unsent love letters.
Oh, cool.
Obviously, that morphed over time, and eventually, in the ashes of a pilot not getting picked up, and it was a pilot that I really cared about too. Like it was something that came from my heart, and then I watched the machinations of Hollywood sort of go, what if this character was like this? And you're like, okay, I guess they know better, but it was like. And I'm okay with the fact that those changes and there's a machinery in place and that all has to happen. I get it, but it was sort of heartbreaking. And in the ashes of sort of that, I was like, well, what if I did something where I just got to be my own, use my own instincts? I didn't need someone's permission to say this is good or not, because at the end of the day, we made all those compromises for these big corporations, and the thing still sat on a shelf, and then we're left with mediocre product. Like 'cause it was a watered down execution of whatever those ideas were.
Yeah.
And so I decided to eventually put Crush Nights on stage, and that morphed into it's not just letters, it's diaries, it's poems, and it's also got a better title. Although one that had I known Twitter was going to exist, it is a bad title from a marketing and branding standpoint because it's not really hashtagable,
Right.
because everyone uses the word mortified. It's a common word. Had I spelled it mortified with 2 D's, I would have been okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and you said something. I was listening to an interview with a showrunner. I wish I could remember what show it was, but a pretty successful showrunner.
Sure.
Recently, who was saying, you got to make the show you want and sort of forget the notes, and because your show is either going to get canceled or it's going to succeed based on how good it is. And these guys who are going to change your product they're not invested in it, right? Like, and you are, and so if the show's going to get canceled, get your show canceled that you wanted to make.
It was one of my biggest lessons and it took me many years to learn it and to have. And it's a hard balance, but the lesson is like, okay, so there's somebody who's been doing it allegedly longer than you, or definitely in a higher position of. They got to their position of authority that is granting you the permission to do whatever it is you're doing, and they say, you should do this because our research or my boss or whatever their logic is, and you go, oh, I don't like it, and you kind of have to agree with it, but 9 times out of 10, I have learned that their logic is so fleeting, and it is. And it's also just like you can't even have a dialogue about it. And the problem with that is, of course, you kind of have to listen to those people, because if you don't, you're this sort of maverick asshole, which sometimes totally works for people. Like there's certain directors I've heard of who are famously dicks. But they're that way because by the time you have to compromise, then they're like... overcompensating for being an asshole because they know when they have to get pulled back a little bit that they're still going to have control. And so they've learned to act like a baby because the system sort of demands it. Now, the optimist in me wants to believe, well, you don't have to be like that. Like, you could get there by being that. And that's probably true as well. But yeah, so it's that whole like push and pull. But like I'm, you get notes from... we had this TV show on the Sundance Channel, and we would get notes that would be just, I don't know, you get your crazy network notes or whatever from somebody. And then when you'd have a very logical reply to that note, you realize that note didn't come from the person who gave it to you,
Right.
nor did it come from their superior. It came from 3 superiors up, from some guy or from some dude or some woman who just popped their head in for a minute and went, like, looked into the project and went, the T-shirt should be bright orange, or the name of this character should be that, or the title of this show should be, whatever their note is.
We need an A in the title.
Yeah, and there's logic and reason behind their note, and those people are super smart. But if you want to be like, well, wait, that doesn't actually make sense because of X, Y, and Z,
Right.
you're blocked
Right.
from the chain.
Yeah.
You can't go back
Yeah,
up
sure.
the ladder.
So would you say that your ability to argue your own vision is like a necessity in your industry?
In what? Well,
Like,
yeah,
if
my
you have
industry
this
is a
i-
weird industry. I don't
Right.
even know
Well,
what
if
that
you
is,
have
but-
this idea and these networks and these executives are like, this could be better this way, but you really believe, like, how do you protect your story or your brand or your...
The best way, I'm
Yeah.
glad you asked that, is the way that Mortified has existed for 13. We've been around for 13 years, and the only way we have is because while we've danced with Hollywood a couple times, none of our successes have ever come from that. Most of our failures have come from that, or at best like a medium success. Like we had this TV show, it ran for 2 seasons, and it did good. It was okay, and I'm proud of the show, but nowhere near as successful as I think things we've done outside the system. So like our stage shows, our podcast, and definitely our film, and those were all things that we made circumventing, which was, and it all goes back to that moment of failure that I had, in early 2000s, where I was like, oh, what if I did something where I'm my own green light?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if I could just rely on my own instincts, and if it sucks, that's okay, because whatever sucks about it was my own fault,
Right.
and I can take responsibility for that, and I can grow and change from that, or I can ignore it. But it's not from somebody who popped their head in for 2 seconds and
Right.
said, you know what, I think, and then their dumb idea becomes God, becomes
Sure.
word.
Yeah.
And, that is very bad, I think, for the creative process, at least when you have a weird idea. I think if I had a cop show that was like, and it was called like, name a city. Any
Miami.
city. Miami, but not Vice, because that's taken. But if it was like some show called like Miami PI, right?
Yeah.
And it's like every year there's a new show about doctors or cops, and there's a city in the title and some variation of force, cop, PI, medics, something like that, lawyer, law firm. And if I had an idea like that, I think those ideas, even if those ideas, and there's some great cop and lawyer and medical shows, obviously, but because they're, I don't know, maybe less risky in terms of just as a premise, maybe their executions are risky, I think you can go through the system easier. But I think when you have an idea that doesn't have a lot of comparisons, like Mortified, there's not a lot. If I ever go to the few times we've tried to go the TV route or any kind of Hollywood route with it, it's like, well, what can I point to that's just like it on the air? Like we had a meeting at the CW a few months ago, and they're like, they're bringing back, or maybe they've already done it, Whose Line Is It Anyway? And they're like, we see this as being a potential pairing for
Oh, wow.
for Whose Line Is It Anyway? And it's like, okay, I see why they'd think that, because they're both comedic and sort of unscripted, whatever. But
Yeah.
I was like, and performative, but those are nothing alike.
No.
Like, if
Right.
anything, we're more like the Virgin show that they have on TV, like whatever that scripted.
Oh,
what's that show?
Oh, the Jane
Jane the Virgin, right?
Oh, okay.
So like we're more of a dramedy, if
Yeah.
anything.
A
And so,
dramedy.
you know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of things you can, like we're more Gilmore Girls or something than we are some comedic reality show like Jackass.
Right.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
so there's not, and so there are things like us in the world that are successful. There's things like The Moth. There's things like This American Life. There's things in that wheelhouse, but there's not a ton of examples in media.
Yeah.
Mostly in the theater world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you talk about, TV, and you've built, this, but the brand is built grassroots.
Yep.
And so how do you balance those things as it continues to grow? I don't know, what your plan is from here.
You know what's interesting? You have a similar cadence to my cousin Justin.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're a lot alike in certain
I don't know
ways.
this.
You have like a cool like.
I gotta meet him.
Yeah.
That's funny.
I was like, oh, he sounds like. I was like, oh my god, he sounds like Justin.
Justin. So we went to high school together. We were like distant friends in high school. We were cool, but we didn't really know each other too well. Yeah. And then in college, he used to come down to LA to party, and he would stay at my house a couple of times, and so we got to know each other a little bit then. But it's been like a weird thing where over the years we've become closer, which is sort of unusual for someone you've known this long. Usually it's like you were really close then, and it just sort of trails off. It's kind of gone the other way, but yeah, we sort of feel like family a little bit in the sense of like, you just sit down with somebody and it's you're kind of like talking to yourself,
right?
A little bit.
Well, you have a similar, maybe Cassandra, you have a similar cadence to your childhood friends too. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're all the same.
I totally derailed your question.
Yeah. So how do you balance? It's
how do
Something
you,
about grassroots.
Yeah, so
something about grass.
How do you take things onto TV, into movies, into these mass media, and still keep it grassroots and still keep that community sense of ownership?
Two answers probably. One involves
pick one.
Be fairly broke, so then you have no choice.
Nice.
No, but the other thing is, I think it's messaging, and I think it's like I'm like I answer most of the emails that come to the website, which is a huge
commitment.
It's I can't even tell you what a slowdown that is, but and at some point that will change. But
so if you're listening, send Dave an email.
Yeah, exactly. But like even like but the thing is, people appreciate that.
Yeah.
So if they get like on my way here, I literally was handling a ticketing question from some woman, and she was like, I saw the movie and I want to get tickets to the show, but she had an issue with her ticket or something, and she was like, you're calling me? And that meant a lot to her. Like it makes it feel like a family, makes it feel like a community.
Hopefully it wasn't over text, because that's illegal.
What?
While you're driving.
Oh, no, it was not. Okay. It was not.
Good. Don't text and drive, kids.
I'm kind of a weird safety nut. Although, especially with fire. So like, I don't know why I've never been.
You have fire going while you're driving?
I've never been. No, but I'm like, sometimes people make fun of me for being so. Like I try not to text and drive, and like if you ever left a laptop at the edge, like on a bed on like a
you would think
mattress,
it would just
my
blow up.
OCD would like kick in. I'd be like, no. Like we have to move that. That is a hazard. Damn it.
So what's the fire bit?
I don't know.
Like what's a crazy?
Just weird.
That's where it goes.
But what's the crazy fire?
No, it's gonna fall and then it's gonna blow up and then it's gonna be.
You're not worried the laptop is gonna catch fire. You're just worried that it's gonna fall.
No. The laptop could overheat or it could fall and damage the laptop.
Nice.
Wait, so I hear that a lot from.
I'm a lot of fun.
Wait, so I hear that a lot from successful people that have built a brand through that, that very organic.
You don't want to talk about fire safety?
No, thanks. The woman who built, the CEO of Bare Minerals, same story. I mean, she gave her number to everyone. She answered every email, and then eventually she had to change her number multiple times because it was taking up her whole life.
At some point it becomes.
So, but that's the identity behind Mortified is
part
you
of it.
and.
Yeah, and also like even the messaging, like we try like anything that we like put out there, like we really try to make it about. This is a thing where anybody can participate. It's not open mic, but anybody can participate, and without it, and the goal is to do that in a way that doesn't sound canned or forced or, like all I want is for people to go out and have a good time with their friends. That's general. Like Mortified is often used as a bonding activity, and I take that really serious, and I take like I think it's really. I don't know. I feel like I stumbled onto something that I'll probably never stumble onto again in my life, even if I found something that was far more lucrative or far more popular or whatever. But I don't think I'll ever find something as special, and I'm really protective over that specialness, that speciality, that specialesque. There's a word.
Specialistic.
Specialistic. Perfect.
That's the official term. So talk about the community. Like, what role? So first of all, how did this community grow around what you're doing, and what role does it play in the evolution of the brand?
It is the brand. There is no Mortified without its community, because the reason somebody shows up, actually on our website it says, how does it work in terms of participating? And it's like a 6-step thing. You can see it at getmortified.com/participate. But, and then like the first step is like, you find something in your past in an old shoebox, and you're like, oh my God. Like, I think when I walked in, Cassandra, you said you had like found something of your past. No,
she was making it up.
Oh, you were talking about your childhood.
No, yeah, she was coming up with.
Yeah, I was doing a DIY.
So somebody
Freestyle.
like Cassandra you find something in your past, and you're inspired to share it, and then you come to us, and you contact our website, and you go through the process, and eventually you wind up getting on stage and sharing it with a bunch of people. Somebody in the audience hears that, laughs at it, and goes, you know what? I forgot. I also have a thing that's kind of like that, but totally different, and they're inspired to share. And but it's that engine, that circular engine is that cycle is what keeps it going. And so the only reason people show up to the show is to hear that stuff, but that stuff comes from the people who hear it.
Mm-hmm. At your stage,
Snakehead.
at the stage show, do you actually have people on site like collecting stories?
No, well, a couple of things. One, we're specifically what I refer to as sort of artifact-based or memento-based, where the real term for it is juvenilia, which is like things you wrote when you were a kid. But that always sounds
dirty.
That sounds
it does.
way dirty.
It sounds like a pedophile
Juvenilia.
something. Like,
Right.
I'm not sure I know juvenilia stuff with you.
Exactly.
I think because it rhymes with genitalia.
We've moved to like words like memento or what?
I think because it rhymes with genitalia.
It's genitalia and it's
And it's-
pedophilia
and it's
and
juvenile.
yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Don't-
uncomfortable, but it's the official term.
Here's a free tip: never say that word again.
Yeah. So we say terms like artifacts or mementos or whatever. But so because of that, you actually have to have a thing. So at the show, we wouldn't want necessarily people to like bring us the thing.
That would be kind of awesome, though.
Though we encourage them to come up to us after the show and like, usually it's like, oh, I have this thing, but maybe it's not that funny, and we're like, well, that we'll help you with that. This is not a talent contest. In fact, if anything, it's a lack of talent contest in some ways. But we will help you. We'll meet with you, and we'll spend like in a couple hours. I'm going to be on Skype with a woman, I think in St. Louis. I can't remember where she is, but she's going to be traveling to a few cities that happen to be cities where we happen to have stage shows. And I'm going to sit down with her for about an hour, and I'm going to help her. And I'm going to hope that we'll find something in her diaries, her poems, whatever it is, that could possibly be used in a stage show. And we spend a lot of time with each participant. It is not the most efficient thing, but it is, I think, the best thing. I think we spend up to 10 hours with a person. But that first one is the sort of biggest time suck. That first,
that's a commitment.
We
spend like 45 minutes up top, and then maybe another 45 with them, and then we're like, okay, we found enough. Now we can start sort of, working to develop the actual piece.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we see that in a lot of these forums that are, TED Talks, Moth Stories, which you're doing, right? They're all, they feel like they're audience participation, and of course they are, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going into that, right? Like
some projects. So Mortified's heavily curated. Though we do avoid words like audition and tryout or something like that. But we're heavily curated. The Moth slams are open mic,
right?
And that's probably why they limit it to 5 minutes.
Sure.
Because if it sucks,
yeah.
And I've performed in the Moth slams. I find 5 minutes hard a hard amount of time to do a story that has a lot of beats and a great arc.
Yeah, I bet.
But when the Moth slams are great, it's great. But the Moth main stage is, that's curated. TED, I don't really know how they work, but I assume they're heavily curated.
Yeah.
I think the TED, not the TEDx, but the real TED.
Yeah.
I think it's 6 months.
Yeah,
that
it's
they
like
work.
a series.
They work with you on your talk.
Yeah, and that makes
and that's
total
why they're
sense.
as good as they are, and they, millions of people around the world are enjoying them and learning from them.
There's a difference from when you take something from like a level 7 to like a level 9, or if you're lucky, a level 10 in terms of like quality. Like you can have an interesting idea, but like the thing that drives me crazy is I'll go to like, there's a lot of storytelling shows, and some of the storytelling shows are sort of stand-up comic driven.
Right.
I hate those.
Yeah.
Because those are funny people who are great performers, but generally they are up there telling an anecdote that sort of has some events and chronology to it, but it is not a story. It's just an anecdote. And there's no arc. There's nothing they've learned from the experience. There's nothing that makes it a story. And I always like want to wring the necks of some of the more some shows like that, because I'm like, just work with your people. You're a talent who, like these are like, you could turn this from like a 7 into like a 10 if you just spend a little time like helping to shape it. And I think usually what they are is they're too afraid, because sometimes they're like big comedians and they're like, well, what do I know? Like they make themselves inferior. But well, what do I know? Like this person's way funnier than me. And it's like, well, but okay, but don't be in awe of their celebrity, like at all. That helps nobody, including the celebrity.
Yeah. We'll talk about that, because I know you've done the celebrity show. I watched a couple of them. The Rick Schroeder one was crazy.
Yeah, so we did this TV show that was originally sold as the Shoebox Sessions. It was this side project from the makers of Mortified, and the idea was that I would it was based on a web thing we did with Alanis Morissette and Felicia Day, who is a sort of an internet mogul / actress. But the idea was that if it was kind of based on our curating process, where like we sat down with somebody and peeked into the pages of their past, but it was more of an interview format than say a monologue format like our stage show. And the idea is, let's take successful people, and by looking into their old diaries, their old prom photos, whatever, like tea leaves, you can eventually see sort of the ingredients of what somebody became.
Yeah.
And so we sold that to the Sundance Channel at the 11th hour, just before it aired. Lawyers got involved, and they said, we don't like this title, The Shoebox Sessions. Is this a show about sneakers? Valid concern. That was an exec who dropped their head in for a second. She said that, I'm sure. But, lots of TV shows, and their thought was like, they wanted to call it like Starchives, like some terrible, like something that was like very E, not even good enough for E. And like, they just had like a lot
Hard to imagine.
Yeah. So there was just stuff like that. And so we were, but they also had some good suggestions too in terms of what to call it. But we had this whole debate of like titling. And I'm really into titles. And they were like, well, to be a successful show, you have to like call it what it is. Like, 17 Kids and Counting, or one of those kind of titles. And I'm like, that is true for certain types of shows. But also it is not true, because if you look at Jackass, that show is not called Celebrity Pranks.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of an atmospheric title. It's an evocative title. If you look at 30 Rock, I don't know anybody who knew what 30 Rock meant outside of New York City.
Probably still doesn't know.
Or outside of Los Angeles even. And if there's TV is riddled with examples of. Yeah. So anyway, we wound up calling it after much conversation and Starchives did not win out. And became known as the Mortified Sessions. And we were really adamant about like, well, we can't call it Mortified, because that's A, you don't own that, and B, that is a separate thing, and I wouldn't want my fans to think like suddenly we've changed everything about Mortified in order like
to celebrity.
It would feel like a big fuck you. Yeah. And there were fans that actually got very upset about our TV show.
Yeah, it was a trip, and so. So
you can tell that I barely work in television anymore, because I could give a fuck about saying like what was annoying about working on certain projects or not.
No, but that's great, and
Not looking to
I'm
get
sure
hired
that
again.
that's why. But I imagine that's why you're able to have a community that follows you and stays with you through this process, right? Is
Yeah.
because you're willing to be honest and vulnerable. You know, you're both curator, but you're also to some extent the star.
Yep.
Well, you're the
I am the
you're the
face of
star.
Mortified when there a face is sort of needed.
Sure.
Right.
Often there's other faces, but or there's other. You know, we're definitely a giant collective, and so one of my guilts actually, and one thing that I'm is like when I get to like if somebody like yourself wants to interview me, like inherent to that is like this perception that like, oh, he must do all this, and it's like I do a lot of it, but there's this whole team of like, you know, Neil who's my co-producer who's in the movie, you know, who like equal partners,
Right, sure.
and he hosts the podcast with me as well, but there's people all across the country, and so that's also like a big balancing act in terms
Right.
of like when you're talking about like growing a grassroots brand, because it's like we're this hydra, you know, and so we have to make our fans happy, but we also have to make the sort of the producers who run our
course.
stage shows around each country in each city happy, and you know, playing those politics, you know, has its challenges, and for the most part it's always been harmonious with all of those tiers, but
So what's been a lesson in that area?
make people feel heard.
Yeah.
Always make people feel heard, because there's a reason they're saying something. If they're voicing concern, somebody wrote us. It's rare that we get sort of critical fan mail. Usually we'll get like, I love it, and that's great, but you know, it doesn't help shape your ego. It doesn't help shape
Right.
your brand.
Right.
So you need the criticism every once in a while. So
Yeah.
there was a piece performed in San Francisco that dealt with a guy when he was 19 hooked up with someone who he thought was a guy. I mean, who he thought was a girl, but was not. And there were some people from the trans community in the audience, because it is San Francisco or any city really, and but specifically there.
Sure.
And we got several upset emails about how that was handled, because of there were some him at 19 freaked out and was like, I just got a blowjob from a guy, and because he later found out, and he's like panicked, but then he's like, it was a great blowjob. So he's not like, anyway. And it's also like he's 19, and he's the adult him is distanced from it. He's in a show called Mortified, so he's clearly embarrassed about how he acted back then. But it rides a line, and sometimes our pieces are sexist, and sometimes our pieces are just offensive, because kids are going to say what they want to say, and we try not to sort of moralize that too much, but we do want to make sure that the audience understands that the adult
Is over it.
is over it and is different than that, so
Yeah.
that you have permission to laugh at like, I
Right.
can't believe you acted like such an asshole back then,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this person wrote us an email, and actually a few people wrote us an email, like concerned that Mortified, they love the show, they've come to the show for years, it's supposed to be this inclusive environment, and they felt like it was not. They felt not safe. They felt like it was projecting, and
Meaning that you guys were judging the speaker?
no, that they felt that the speaker was spreading hate.
Right.
Now that's not intentional, and I can't say, and most of the audience is laughing, so most of the audience doesn't agree with that.
Right.
And, you know, as an artist, you don't want to listen to every criticism and go, oh, okay, I should change this.
Yeah.
Right.
But as an artist who represents sort of a brand that is all about community, I do want to make sure all those people feel heard, and not because I'm just patting them on the head. Like, I sincerely am listening, and to the point where I heard their concerns, and we said, you know what, that kind of makes sense. Maybe rather than us canning the piece, maybe there's just a way we can position it, present it better. And so I said, what if you consult with us and help us? Like, I'd love to do that piece again,
Nice.
because maybe we'll do that on
Yeah,
the
that's
podcast.
awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing that as a political, like,
Right.
olive branch to them, but
Yeah.
because no one will know. I'm doing that because I want to make our show better. And I actually think there's a chance to make that piece not only not spread hate, but spread love and spread, the inclusivity that I think is part of our mission.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is so hard to do, right? To have, because people buy into this idea and become part of this community and invest themselves in part because of your leadership, right? Because you've had a vision and you put the sweat into executing it, and that's what people want to buy into, right? But at the same time, you're creating those opportunities for people to contribute and to have a voice, right? And balancing that with kind of what you were talking about earlier, like not listening to the notes that come from people who aren't as invested as you are, right? And I think my experience, that's a really hard line to walk. And you I imagine are faced, from time to time with tough decisions about how much of a voice to give or how much to react to the critics or whatever, however few that may be.
I have a responsibility to our community. I don't have a and that's the word I would use, is responsibility. And whenever we've dealt with an exec at a book company or at a TV company or any kind of thing, they don't have that obligation. They're working on this individual project, the Mortified Sessions or whatever the thing is at the time, and so I'm always aware of like, okay, they're not concerned about my community, and so. But that is always going to be my first and foremost obligation, and I just try to remind them of that. And for the most part, they hear that and respect that as much as they can.
Sure. But I guess what I'm saying is even the community members don't always know what's best for the community. They have their own particular perspective, and you can't just open it up and say, hey, tell me what Mortified should be, and I'll go do it.
Yeah, because
you have to lead that.
The people who wrote some angry emails this weekend or concerned emails about the inclusivity, there's also the chance that they're crazy people who just sort of get offended by everything, and I don't want them driving the train. Yeah. So that's why we will have a conversation with them. Yeah. And they seemed completely sane and rational, and they didn't seem. I've met the crazy person who just wants to complain about something because they, who just because they want to feel heard. Yeah. And even with those people, I also think it's important to make those people feel heard, because that's a big thing with me in life is that like, and I think it ties into sort of mental health and all sorts of other things that Mortified ties into and my own personal life ties into. But like, it's important. I think we all feel sort of lonely in moments. I think we all feel isolated, and we want to be acknowledged, and we want to just be reminded, like. Know that we're alive.
Have there been stories that you've decided are just too dark or too sort of dangerous for whatever reason?
We have tackled, if you watch Mortified Nation on Netflix or whatever, we tackle things in that movie like child abuse, things that are super not funny. We've been on This American Life. We've tackled a girl who grew up in Miami who does not sound like you, Cassandra. You'll be happy to know.
Go listen to
that. There's a thing on This American Life, and it's called Miami Vices. You can Google that. And but it's one of my very best friends, Sasha Rothschild, and it's her reading aloud the diaries of when she's 13, and she discovers cocaine and sex and like super nothing. I think she's 13 in it. Like whatever it is, super young, not funny as a topic. And me, like my paternal side comes in, and I'm like, oh my God, like, are you kidding? But there are things that are funny in both of those topics, in child abuse, in divorce, in drug abuse, in all of these things that the topic themselves isn't funny. But there are things about our life experiences and our perspectives on the world at that time. And what I love is getting to mine. To answer your question, no, there's nothing off limits, provided that we can find warmth and humanity in it, and that we're not making fun of the awful events, but that we're, that if we're able to do something that, I think a failure of Hollywood is that whenever we see things about alcoholism or cancer or depression, or that they're void of humanity. They're these trite after-school specials. There's these Lifetime movies that have one note, and the note is like thriller or like sad, dreary, depressing thing, and that is fine, but that is not life. Life, our lives are, every event we have has its low moments, but right next to those low moments is something hilarious.
Yeah.
At least for most people. And I like getting to capture that roller coaster of life. That to me is the true honesty.
How has Mortified, going through this process, you're constantly creating, listening to these heartfelt stories. That must change you as a person. Just, you've heard it all. And you've been able to relate on so many different levels with these people. But like, how have you changed building Mortified?
That's a great question. Well, I've learned a lot more about people's habits when they write as a kid, like weird things of like, apparently a lot of people name their diaries and write to their diaries as though they're an actual person. Dear Bob, dear Karen, that kind of stuff.
Funny.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the underlying stuff, I think when you listen to people's lives all day, which is not too dissimilar from what a therapist does, and I there's a lot of overlap between what we do in that world, but we are not therapists. What we do is therapeutic, but it is not therapy.
Right.
It is entertainment. But when you are listening to people's lives, I think it enriches me. How it has changed me is, I think whenever I'm faced with something crappy in my life, whether it's and probably in the past few years, I've dealt with like deaths and breakups, and as we all do, go through those cycles, right? And when faced with those hardships, you can pull on other people's experiences as models and see how did they survive.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's a line at the end of every podcast we do, and it's the line of every stage show we have, and it's the line at the end of our film. And it's there's a segment called "What Have We Learned," and we sort of comedically recap what we learned in the stage show that night. And at the end of that, we say the most important thing we learned is that, as we do at every edition of Mortified, we are freaks, and we are fragile, and we all survived. And that is a statement that is not cute to me. That is a statement that is very important. And sometimes we'll even get people coming up and go, yeah, but, that's kind of a dumb line because, it sounds nice, but some people don't survive. There's a lot of teenagers, especially in this day and age, who chose a different path.
Sure.
And that's true, but I'm not talking to them. I'm not.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, and actually, here's my best answer for you. I'm realizing there actually is an answer, which is a thing that I didn't learn until Mortified is this idea of, life never gets easier, right? So we're dealing with childhood,
Right.
And when we're kids, even if you had a great childhood, and which in many ways I did, and in some ways I did not. But even if you're one of those people who just like, I don't get the angst, like I've met those people, like, you still dealt with rejection or for something or whatever. And that never ends, right? So no matter who you are, like, the bad shit will always get thrown at you. Someone will die. Someone will disappoint you. You will be rejected because you weren't good enough. You will be judged. So that's the bad news.
Yeah.
Is life, and sometimes life might get shittier. So that's even the worst news. But none of those things, literally none of those things will kill you.
Right.
Yeah. Unless they are literally somebody giving you poison or someone shooting you.
No,
Right.
yeah.
None of
Sure.
those things, like getting rejected for prom, going through divorce,
Yeah.
losing a parent, whatever it is, none of that, and that's a super important lesson that I get to witness, and I get a real cool front row seat to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So music is typically a big sort of outlet for
You want to get out of the deep stuff?
No, but you're talking about this teen angst, which I think is really what the show is about to a certain extent.
Uh-huh.
And so traditionally music's been an outlet for that.
Yes.
Kids lose themselves in music. They identify with lyrics. They, join bands to cope or combat, whatever angst they're going through, right? And so, and this, what you're presenting is another way. Was that for you? Was music important, and how did those things kind of play together?
Was music important in my life, or is music important in Mortified?
No, in your sort of teenage experience.
In my yeah, very much so. Like I was, I remember like I was a freshman in college, and I wanted to be known for like a certain type of music, and I realized like, well, those people are the goth people, and those people are the hippie people,
right.
and those people are the sort of like jocks, and they all had their thing, and I was like, I don't really know what I am, and then I walked up to my friend who was the super alterna girl, Justine and Kristen, and I walk up to these girls. And I was like, hey guys, I remember this moment, because the moments that I remember in life I'm learning are all about shame, and because I'm embarrassed of this. But I've latched onto this moment that I know that they don't remember, which is, hey guys, I finally figured out what a way to describe the music I like. And they were like, oh, okay. Asterisk, they clearly could not give a shit because they just liked me for being me.
Right.
And I did not need to impress them or put myself in a box. And they were like, well, what is it? And I was like, well, sort of like kind of Canadian punk meets like indie, but pop with harmony. And like, I realized I didn't really have an answer, but I was into a lot of...
You were ahead of your time. You're worldly.
I was into world music.
Who was the band? Like, what was...
I was obsessed with this Canadian rock band of the 90s called Rio Statics, which I don't even listen to now.
That's not a real band.
Yeah, exactly. But I was into like all these like... it didn't even matter. And
no, I'm just curious.
I was into a lot of Canadian music because I grew up on the border. I grew up in Detroit, or suburban Detroit, and so I listened to and watched a lot of like CBC. And they have laws where they have to 30% or some sort of percentage has to be Canadian content. Yeah. And so I would be exposed to a lot of stuff, and I liked a lot of that. But I was also really into Sinead O'Connor. Like, I think she gets a bad rap. I think she's crazy, but she's amazing crazy.
Yeah, she's dope.
She's cramazing. But Michael Penn, who is now like he composes the music for girls, but like Sean Penn's brother. Yeah. But Amy Mann's husband. Like, he's not really known really now, but like I was super into him, and he had a song called Invisible about like being a guy at a coffee shop, and the waitress like, pours him a drink and like he doesn't even like notice him because he's just invisible. And like I felt so connected to that song, right, for reasons that probably don't, because I've always been a sort of fairly social person, so I think in my head I wanted to be the quiet, like I wanted to be
an introvert.
I wanted to be Christian Slater and Pump Up the Volume, where like
brooding.
I was just brooding. Yeah, it was not that at all.
No.
But anyway, so that was the music that kind of owned me. But I'm super into music now, but like not where I'm like writing. Like this guy in high school, I remember Eddie Vedder did an unplugged set and wrote pro-choice on his arm and a Sharpie in the middle of his thing, which is kind of a ridiculous move, but all right, rock stars can do that stuff. Sure. And the next day at school, this guy, Tom, showed up, and he had written pro-choice on his arm in a Sharpie.
Nice. Because
like you just want that identity.
Right.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Oh, so what are you into now?
I am obsessed with a musician called I kind of go back and forth between like sort of gender-specific artists, and I think now I'm in a male-centric stage, but I love this guy Farabee Lionheart, Was
Wow.
a bizarre name. Yeah, he's L.A. and Nashville based. He hasn't put out something in a while, but he performed. We're recording this right next to Hotel Cafe, and he performs there sometimes. Fairby Lionheart, a guy named Benji Hughes, who's really great. And I really like this band Sylvan Esso, which is not singer-songwriter-y. That's what those other two
Yeah,
were.
that sound. The other
Sylvan
guys sound
Esso
like
is Sylvan Esso is more. It's like a male-female duo, sort of electro kind of mid-tempo kind of stuff. But they're really, I don't know. They've like cool. I like their beats.
I think you two would probably have a lot of music in common.
Us two.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think so.
Why would
I love singer-songwriter stuff.
Like
there's
moody.
this
I
band
do.
called Win Win that I've been downloading. They have a song called "Been So Long" that you should download after this because it is like I want it to be the theme song. We're working on 5 specials right now, 5 1 hours. We're hopefully going to be shooting. Each one will be themed, like a gay one and a straight one and like a romance one and a sports one. So we're in the process of getting those off the ground, and I haven't even told the director of this yet, but like I really want this one song by Win Win to be like our theme, the new theme song. I don't think
Nice.
we can afford it, but
Breaking news here on Rebel
Yeah.
Radio.
yeah.
If you like Win Win, hit us up on Twitter at Rebel Radio Net. Hit Dave up on Twitter. Wherever you want.
Oh,
Get
Tom
Mortified.
Rosenthal. That's
Okay.
the other guy. I just want to, if you're, now I'm getting really geeky on my music, but like Tom Rosenthal is this UK singer-songwriter guy. And if you like sensitive sad boy music, oh boy,
Really?
Tom Rosenthal will own your shit.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. So Justin, your cousin,
Yeah.
and I, like, we were both heavily influenced by hip hop.
Yep.
Growing up, obviously, I'm
He had a
guessing
magazine back in the day.
Yeah, he had a magazine. I wrote for it.
Nice.
And we were in the same business.
Like
he
a
and I.
hip hop magazine, right?
Yeah. Klub, because there was an umlaut over the U because
When I was like a
that
kid and
makes-
I thought he
because
was
grammar.
so cool.
What?
He was like 2 years older than me or something, and I came to visit him once, and
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, my cousin's so cool. He runs a magazine, and it's about like rap and
That
skateboarding.
is super cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so, and I was in that world as well. And you know, I find it so interesting. Like, it took me a while to realize that that wasn't everyone's experience. And it wasn't really until I got to UCLA and everyone was all like Eddie Vedder, and which to me meant nothing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I kind of heard those songs and they were fine.
Yeah, if you're a
but
hip hop guy, you're not going to be
Yeah.
into Pearl Jam. I kind of didn't. I wasn't like full on grunge guy, but like hung out with the guys that were,
right.
and so like I absorbed that through osmosis a little bit. But
Yeah.
but hip hop guys would never be into. Maybe you would like Nirvana, but not Pearl Jam. That's too fratty.
Sure. Yeah, and it, you know, it was weird to me because I was so immersed in this culture, right? Of, you know, the emergence of hip hop and, you know, what that was doing to pop culture in the world and all of that at the time. And then to realize that, like, there were guys my age who were totally unaffected by that and, you know, didn't know about most of it, and it didn't really mean anything to them.
Right.
And, you know, but I think that's interesting kind of to talking about Mortified, right? How that, like, we each come to this with a totally different experience. And, you know, there's these sort of universal truths that run across all that. But I don't know. It's, I find it fascinating how personal and universal things can be at the same time.
I have learned that the more specific something is about your life, the easier it is for someone to relate to it.
Yeah.
So, that girl who I said, you know, was on This American Life for Mortified, reading about very specific, you know, I'm not someone who, I don't do coke. I didn't have sex when I was 13. I can't relate to her experience, but I could laugh at that. And I've thought about this a lot. Like, well, why could we laugh at that?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe firmly the only reason we can laugh, in at least in things in like Mortified or personal stories stuff, is if we're connecting on some level. And it's because underneath the sort of the details, we're you can sort of hear like, oh, well, I've tried to fit into a thing, doing a thing that I probably shouldn't have been. I've been reckless, you know, like whatever your version of reckless is. And I've, you know, and so there's, yeah, I think it's an unusual thing that you bring up with this notion of like, things can be very detailed and specific and yet very universal. And I think when you're very vague and be like, oh, I had a crush on a boy or I had a crush on a girl or whatever, like, you know, it doesn't resonate with everyone goes, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It feels very Hallmark cardy. It's like very vanilla. But when it's super specific about some weird thing you did, the lengths you went for some crush, people then go, oh, I didn't do that, but I had my own version of that.
Yeah, I can see myself in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wonder, like, could you have a rapper on Mortified?
We've had many.
Have you?
Yeah. Do you mean like a celebrity rapper or?
Yeah, I just, like, I think of hip-hop culture as, like, about bravado and really hiding behind your mask and, you know, not, they're sort of, I'm generalizing, obviously, but it's about telling false truths in the sense of, like, it's about creating your persona for entertainment purposes and not really pulling back the curtain.
Yeah, well, I know we've never had celebrity hip hop musicians. Actually, a little bit. We had a guy from the Far Side. One of the guys from the Far Side, Trey, did something with us once. But
we love Trey.
But it was not, you know.
He's the kind of guy I could see.
Yeah, he was cool. But generally, no. We have lots of people who wrote. Because we don't really dwell on celebrity that much, so it's like generally when we have somebody in the show, it's because they wrote a rap when they were a kid. Yeah, and we've got tons of those. You know,
I'm sure,
and that rap is, you know, atrocious, and typically it's like it's a white guy or Hispanic guy or an Asian guy, but like what's frustrating is like that's actually like I want more black dudes in our show badly. And it's just about who comes to us with stuff.
Yeah. Right.
And what I've learned is dudes, specifically straight dudes, they are less likely to have diaries, but they're more likely to have lyrics. And then, you know, you wind up having to sort of, you know, rely on for whatever reason, like any kind of cultural stereotype of like, well, what might he have been into? In terms of like when you want to get certain people on the show. So we've tried getting people like being like who we know write stuff now, and that usually means you wrote stuff back then. Although the trick is a lot of raps people wrote as kids are funny on purpose. Right. And they're not very sincere. Right. And so it's like, well, our goal on our show is to sort of laugh at it. So it's fine if it's a funny on purpose rap, but there needs to be a reason that it's also mortifying. Even if even if you wrote a rap about how your teacher smelled and like farts, right? So if you're that guy who wrote that because you're 14 and you're being funny, and all the rhymes in it are very clever and great, but if you wrote that to impress a girl, now that's suddenly funny, or potentially, you know, like a girl doesn't want to hear a song about farts. There's there's probably a better way to seduce a woman.
Not usually.
Not usually, but or usually.
No, not usually.
Yeah,
that's funny. Well, you said something earlier. I want to touch on that.
This is why I'm alone.
You mentioned shame. Earlier, and I think, you know, there's a general sort of decline in shame in America, it feels like. And to me, Mortified is one example of that, right? Like I said, you know. Yeah, and
there's a healthy version of that and an unhealthy version of it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because you were talking about oversharing earlier.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think, but those are themes, right, that as society evolves, we're wrestling with those things, right? We come out of the 50s, which was a very shameful or you know, high shame generation.
I would agree with that.
And this is part of maybe the catharsis or healing of that.
Mortified is part of a personal mission for me that I didn't even realize that I was on before Mortified. I'm writing a book right now, and part of the proposal that I'm hopefully sending out in like a month or so actually deals with this topic. The book deals with shame quite a bit. And I was just writing about I'm on this mission to eradicate shame or unhealthy shame. And there are people in pop culture who are if speaking of TED Talks, like Brene Brown, who's like famously has this like popular YouTube video about shame. And I'd love for Mortified to work with her. Oh my God. But I do think there's a degree of shame that's of course healthy. I'm not a huge fan of oversharing. I do believe in when something's about you and you're sharing it for you because then it's not worth then keep it to yourself.
Right.
If you're sharing it because it has value to somebody else, that's worth sharing. As long as as best as you can control, and that's why one of the reasons we curate our show, I mean, there's a bunch, but one of them is I want to make sure that it's not this gross exercise in exhibitionism, which it can be. Like this whole me. Like, remember the early days of Twitter before it became about jokes? And early Twitter was about, I'm at the store.
Right.
Remember that person on Facebook?
Yeah.
Status.
And you'd have to but it was like, I'm at the store. Like, that's not interesting.
Right.
That's just fuck you with your just oversharing and it's gross. And that whole the Kim Kardashian, Paris Hilton, like that end of pop culture where it's just about the meanness of it all. And I think it sort of has a place, but it's not something I'm super into. But I am into this idea of some shame is good, but for the most part, shame is, which I clearly have a huge relationship to, just given what I do with Mortified, but just in life in general, is a I think creates a lot of disease in our world, and so I think and it produces a lot of joy when we get rid of it. Like, I remember before what was the movie, American Pie, like before that movie, teenage boys did not admit that they masturbated. That movie, I know this sounds insane, is a politically, it actually has huge social significance. And I know this only because this is a topic in my line of work. I am weirdly talking about what teenagers are doing.
Sure.
And I remember we couldn't talk about that, but sort of post that movie, that changes. Where it's okay. And it becomes and it's something you give your friends shit about. And I think that's so, that's an example of obviously that's not that important on some levels, but on a lot of levels it is. I think it's I
think it's fairly
and
important.
I think the fact that you were branding the 1950s as having lots of shame and judgment, from what we know of it, the three of us were not alive during then, but it seems to be that was the case. And we've had a hard time getting older generations to understand the show, and when they do come to the show and occasionally even participate in the show, it takes them a little bit to wrap their head around it. Why would you want to?
Right. Yeah.
And but once they get into it, they see that it's about humanity. They see that there's a human soul connection to it, and it's they might get uncomfortable by some of the graphic sexual content that often occurs in Mortified, but and so they'll feel safer with the pieces that are I hate my dad, where it's just a little more PG.
Right. I imagine it has to be in some ways challenging to cross generational boundaries. You mentioned a little bit of the challenge of crossing ethnic, racial boundaries. I imagine even political boundaries maybe are tough to manage. I don't know how much you get.
Well, we're based in cities, and generally cities tend to be liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and our appeal is people between the ages of 25 and 45, leans female.
Yeah. Feels like a very liberal exercise.
It's probably more, I'm sure we have a lot of conservatives, but they're probably more libertarian conservatives, not the anti-gay marriage types.
Right.
But but we have tons of people who grew up in that culture.
Of course.
You know, we have tons of people who grew up in very conservative, very shame-based homes. And one of my favorite genres of mortified pieces and is sort of closeted gay kids who grew up in religious homes. So in our movie, in Mortified Nation, there's a guy in the middle of the film, a black guy who grew up in the South, went to church 5 days a week. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
There's no way that guy felt okay to be whatever his sexuality was going to be.
Right.
And so as a result, he winds up doing very reckless, very scary, very devious. Well, devious might be the wrong word, but very risky behavior. He winds up meeting a guy on the internet and they meet in a truck and hook up. Again, not funny as a topic. But what is funny is sort of his level of denial and his perspective on the world at the time. And so we wind up laughing at other things in the piece. But my heart breaks when I hear those, pieces like that, because it's like, I get really angry at those parents. I get really angry at that culture. Because it's unnecessary. Like to make somebody feel, shame to where they're going to go out and have really unhealthy consequences. Like, it turned out okay for the guy in our film, but it didn't turn out okay for lots of other people. Who wind up getting beat up in a parking lot because they meet a guy on Craigslist.
Absolutely.
As happened to me last night.
Craigslist is a tough place. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to get kicked out of here.
Oh, yeah. We're running out of time. Oh, here's a good one. How successful are you?
What's the barometer, right? I think I always say I'm lowercase s successful.
Okay.
I think it's I'm glad you asked that, because it's something that I struggle with a lot. Is that you can be real hard on yourself, and sometimes people see me as, or Mortified as, being this big thing, this influential thing, and then I'll get into my headspace and sort of see it as, but blah 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 blah, asterisk asterisk asterisk. And I think we all run our lives that way. And when that overtakes me, in moments in my life, you're just around a negative person.
Yeah.
And that is a behavior that I have spent the past couple of years actually trying to change. Because it's like, why? Like, yes, these things aren't correct yet in your life, or these things haven't met expectations yet, but give yourself a break.
So when have you wanted to give up, and what made you push through it?
All the time. We made that movie because we wanted to give up, because we're like, let's just make something that's going to be a record for posterity.
Yeah.
Of, if this doesn't go on further, Neil, though we didn't know it at the time that we agreed to this, like, he wound up having a baby, and his priorities changed. So we were like, let's preserve what we let's preserve this, so that there's a record that we can tell our kids one day, or we can tell whoever in our future generations that this existed, this mattered to us, and mattered to a lot of other people, and so that's the only reason we made Mortified Nation, was that. And kind of like Mortified began out of sort of the ashes of some failure, Mortified Nation, the film, sort of came from that as well, where it's just saying, like, it's important for us to capture this, because it may not go on forever, because what we're doing is sort of weird and doesn't, it brings in success in various ways, sometimes financial, sometimes with getting to meet people, and sometimes leading to weird opportunities. But I'm derailing my thought. I forgot where I was. And I'm
well,
not even a
we're just
stoner.
talking about the moments where you want to give up, and
Right.
I'm curious to know when you're in that, what pushes you through it.
I think I have an obsessive personality, and which is something I was not aware of, like articulate. I was not able to articulate about myself until very recently, like in the past few years. And I was like, oh, I have an obsessive personality, and I think probably all my friends were like, yeah.
Yeah. Duh.
But that sort of just wanting to sort of like keep working on a thing, like keep trying to perfect a thing, keep tightening screws. They're like, yeah, but it doesn't look right yet, right? And so if Mortified's a painting, it's that. Sure. And I think that's what keeps me going. And really, it's like anytime Mortified has been more effort than it seems worth, we get an amazing email from a teenager who's like, hey, I discovered this thing and I'm going through this right now, and boom, and you're like, you're just like devastated, or we get just somebody tells you it matters to them, and you go, oh right, and had I gone this other route, had I abandoned, early on we shot a pilot for Comedy Central. When it was done, this was like in our first year of existence, the advice to me was, move on. This is what a big time agent said. Let people forget about it, and that person was wrong, very wrong. And I wouldn't get to connect. I wouldn't get to have people change my life who have come into my life. And
so when will you know it's time to stop?
You mean this interview?
No,
And
that was 5 minutes ago. But
now we're into overtime with the studio. I asked that Neil and I talk about that all the time. Every time we're ready to, it's that whole adage of they pull me back in, because every time we do a thing, it like doesn't become as big as we wanted it to, where we can kind of feel like we can breathe, but it always gets bigger, and it always becomes a thing where it's like, well, how you can't stop now, because it's like there's always a trajectory. It's just, and so right now our podcast is which I hope people will subscribe to, is the focus of everything we're doing, and is really growing.
Nice. Cool. Well, definitely, if you're listening, check out the podcast, check out the live show, watch it on Netflix, wait for the book.
The chewing gum? What?
No, the game.
The game,
The
sorry.
game.
You have to do the game because
Mortified, the board game.
there's someone out there doing it.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yep.
There's
And
something
they
there.
haven't done it yet.
I see you in like a Cards Against
But
Humanity
it's-
type of
Yep.
vibe.
I'm so excited about it.
If you're sorry, go on.
Maybe we can just make one. A
That's
DIY
right.
style.
I can show you our specs for all of that.
Nice. Excellent. And send us thoughts, comments, notes for Dave. Hit us on Twitter. Hate mail, for sure. You can reach us on Twitter at Rebel Radio Net. Find us on SoundCloud /Rebel_radio. And check out Mortified and let us know what you think. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
That was Dave Nadelberg. I'm Josh Levine. You're on Rebel Radio. Come back next week for more ridiculousness. Leave us a comment on SoundCloud or iTunes, or shoot over a paper airplane in my direction. Later.